in a tale that twists from excitement to tension and then to an unexpected revelation. Miss Charlotte, one of the wealthiest women in the country, carefully orchestrated her final act to outsmart her children. Worried about their greed, she prepared a surprise in her will to ensure they wouldn't act out of selfishness. When her children gathered to hear the reading, they never imagined that their mother had one final lesson to teach, a lesson that would challenge their character and redefine their relationship with wealth. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Miss Charlotte, an elegant matriarch known for her vast wealth and unyielding spirit, was haunted by a gnawing concern as her days dwindled. She could see how greed flickered in her children's eyes, even when masked by polite smiles. Though her health faded, her mind remained sharp, and she became determined to protect her legacy from being tainted by avarice. With a heavy heart, she devised a clever plan, one that would ensure her offspring would not claw at each other in a desperate scramble for her fortune. As the end neared, Charlotte's once vibrant home became a mausoleum of her life's memories. Her children, who had long been consumed with anticipation over the riches they were certain would soon be theirs, remained oblivious to their mother's astuteness. They eagerly awaited the reading of her will, unaware that their mother, even in her final moments, had been one step ahead of them. The day finally came, and the siblings, each driven by their brand of greed and expectation, gathered in the grand parlor, a room now filled with more tension than warmth. Richard, the eldest, paced restlessly, his thoughts racing with dollar signs and assets. His ambition had always outpaced his empathy, and now, more than ever, he was eager to claim what he believed was rightfully his. Susan, methodical and calculating, sat with her sharp eyes fixed on the lawyer's briefcase, silently calculating the potential division of wealth. Laura, the youngest, held back, her heart heavy with the loss of her mother, but clouded by the uncertainty of what would unfold. When the lawyer finally arrived, his entrance was as somber as the occasion demanded. His eyes, lined with years of service to Miss Charlotte, scanned the room, sensing the swirling emotions of those before him. With a voice steady yet sorrowful, he began to read the will, each word like a thread, weaving the final tapestry of Miss Charlotte's intentions. The children leaned in, their minds fixated on the material gains they expected. But as the reading continued, it became clear that Miss Charlotte had orchestrated one last lesson for them, a lesson on humility, respect, and the true value of her legacy. In that grand, silent room, the siblings' expectations unraveled as they realized they had been outmaneuvered by their mother's wisdom. Miss Charlotte had not only anticipated their desires, but had also crafted a legacy far more enduring than wealth alone. In her final act, she ensured that the bonds of the family would be tested not by their wealth, but by their willingness to honor the values she had lived by. And so, even in death, Miss Charlotte's influence lingered, teaching her children that some inheritances cannot be measured in gold or property, but in the strength of character and the depth of understanding they left behind. Mr. Evans lifted his hand, effectively cutting off Richard mid-sentence with a sharp, commanding glare. It's far from straightforward. Your mother's will is not as simple as you might think. It contains certain unique stipulations. Susan, the middle child, shot a knowing glance at Laura, the youngest, whose serene demeanor stood in stark contrast to Richard's visible frustration. As tension filled the room, Susan turned her gaze back to the lawyer, her mind racing with questions about what these unique stipulations might entail. What exactly do you mean by that, Mr. Evans? Susan's voice was steady, but there was an underlying intensity, reflecting her experience as a lawyer accustomed to unraveling complex legal riddles. The lawyer adjusted his glasses with deliberate care and began to speak, his words measured and deliberate. Miss Charlotte had a distinct and unwavering vision for how her legacy should be distributed. Beyond mere material wealth, she also included specific instructions regarding the influence each of you could exert on the world. All will be revealed shortly, he said, thumbing through the documents. Are you truly prepared to hear your mother's final wish? A wave of confusion swept through the siblings as they exchanged anxious glances. It was Laura who found her voice first. "Yes, Mr. Evans, we're ready." With a solemn nod, Mr. Evans began to read aloud the meticulously drafted words of Miss Charlotte. "My beloved children, if you are hearing this, it means I have left this world. I understand that you anticipate a straightforward division of my estate, but there is one last request that must be honored." Richard, his impatience boiling over, interrupted. "What is she talking about now?" Mr. Evans gave him a withering look, silencing him instantly. "If you allow me to proceed, Mr. Richard, all will become evident." Susan gently placed her hand on Richard's arm, urging him to calm down. "Please, Richard, we need to hear what Mother wanted. We owe her that much." Despite her unease, Susan nodded in agreement. She reflected quietly, her thoughts a swirl of memories and suspicions. Mother always had her reasons, no matter how mysterious. Let's hear the rest. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued, his voice tinged with gravity. "My wealth will not be divided among you in the usual manner. Instead, you must prove your worthiness through two challenges that I have carefully designed. Only those who face both trials with sincerity and integrity will be deemed worthy of inheriting my estate." A heavy silence descended upon the room, the shock of the revelation leaving the siblings momentarily speechless. Susan was the first to gather her thoughts, breaking the uneasy quiet. The three of them exchanged looks of disbelief. It was Richard who broke the silence again, his frustration spilling over. "Challenges? What sort of twisted game is this? Mother always had a way of complicating things beyond reason." "What does she mean by challenges?" Susan asked, her voice quivering with a mix of fear and confusion. "This can't be serious, can it, Mr. Evans?" Laura arched an eyebrow, deep in thought. "Yes, this is highly unusual. Did she ever hint at something like this?" The lawyer's expression was grave as he nodded slowly. "Your mother's instructions were explicit and unyielding. She devised two tests to determine who among you is truly deserving of her fortune." Richard, his temper flaring, slammed his hand on the table with a loud thud, his face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. I want my share of the inheritance, and I want it now." "Richard, calm yourself," Mr. Evans said with a voice that brooked no argument. "If you wish to claim the inheritance, you must honor your mother's wishes." Richard's frustration simmered, barely contained. "This is preposterous. Mother was always eccentric, but this goes beyond anything reasonable." But Laura sat quietly, her hands clasped together as she tried to absorb the enormity of her mother's demands. She had always known that Miss Charlotte had high expectations, but nothing had prepared her for this. "I never anticipated anything like this," Susan admitted, her voice wavering between uncertainty and determination as she looked at Mr. Evans. "But if this is what Mother wanted, then we have to take it seriously." Mr. Evans nodded. "You have some time to reflect and decide how you want to proceed. I will provide further details about the challenges and the deadlines. Please understand, these are Miss Charlotte's final wishes, and they must be respected." The silence that enveloped the room was no longer just one of shock, but one heavy with the realization that their lives were on the brink of profound change. Their futures would not be shaped merely by wealth, but by the trials they would have to face, trials that would not only test their skills but reveal their true character. Laura, typically the most composed of the three, looked at the lawyer with a blend of confusion and concern. What exactly are these challenges? Mr. Evans cleared his throat and continued, his voice steady. "The first challenge will take place in a pitch-black room. Inside that room, there will be three identical boxes. One contains a key, another a deadly scorpion, and the third a venomous snake." A chill ran down Laura's spine as she absorbed the lawyer's grim words. Richard and Susan exchanged anxious glances, their unease palpable. "Each of you must choose and open a box," Mr. Evans explained. "The person who finds the key will advance to the second challenge." Richard, always the hothead, interrupted. "This is insanity. Mother must have been out of her mind before she died." Susan's eyes narrowed as she looked at the lawyer, a mix of fear and determination flashing across her face. "Mr. Evans, this is incredibly dangerous. We can't just go along with this without fully understanding what we're getting into." The lawyer nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I understand this is difficult to accept, but these are the precise instructions left by Miss Charlotte. She believed that only by confronting real challenges could you prove your true worth." Despite the fear gnawing at her, Laura remained outwardly calm. "And if no one finds the key," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then you will fail the first challenge," Mr. Evans replied solemnly, "and none of you will be able to proceed to the second." Richard's agitation was clear, his fists clenched in frustration, but Laura gently placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to soothe him with a calm she didn't truly feel. "We need to think this through and act wisely. This is an extraordinary opportunity Mother has presented us with." Susan took a deep breath, her mind racing as she tried to reconcile her mother's wishes with the heavy responsibility she felt. "All right, we need to understand exactly what's at stake before making any decisions." "And what happens if we choose the wrong boxes?" Susan's voice trembled with fear. Mr. Evans' expression darkened. "Then you will face the consequences, whatever they may be." A dreadful silence settled over the room, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Finally, it was Richard who shattered the tension with a voice full of steely resolve. "Very well. If these are Mother's wishes, we will do as she asks. No matter what the challenges are, I will overcome them and claim what is mine." Susan nodded reluctantly, still grappling with the reality of the situation, while Laura sat in quiet contemplation, sensing that there was more to their late mother's plans than any of them could yet comprehend. Mr. Evans rose from his chair, his movements deliberate as he adjusted his glasses, looking at each of them with a stern expression. "It's crucial that you grasp the gravity of these challenges. Miss Charlotte was meticulous in her decisions, and she did not make them without careful thought." Laura finally broke the tense silence, her voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere. "Mr. Evans, you mentioned that the boxes are placed in a dark room. How are we supposed to choose wisely when we can't see clearly?" The lawyer acknowledged her question with a thoughtful nod. "Each of you will be provided with a flashlight. The boxes will be arranged randomly, and you'll have to rely on your instincts and perhaps your courage to make the right choice." Richard scoffed, his patience thinning. "Let's just get this over with. How much time do we have to decide?" "You have until the end of this week," Mr. Evans replied, his voice steady. "I'll be here to assist you with any queries, but the final decision rests with you." Susan looked at her siblings, her expression a blend of concern and determination. "We need to take this seriously and prepare ourselves thoroughly. This isn't something we can approach carelessly." Laura nodded in agreement, her mind already racing with potential strategies for the upcoming challenge. "Susan's right. We should evaluate all our options before making any moves." The lawyer observed them with a look of respect tinged with solemnity. "Remember, this isn't just about the inheritance. It's about honoring your mother's legacy, a responsibility that goes far beyond mere wealth." An intense silence settled over the room, filled with the weight of what lay ahead. They all knew that their lives were about to be tested in ways none of them could have foreseen, and the outcome would depend not just on their choices but on their ability to face their deepest fears. Mr. Evans regarded the three siblings with a mixture of respect and empathy. "Take the time you need to reflect," he advised. "I'm here to guide you through this process and answer any questions you might have." The siblings exchanged glances, each lost in their thoughts, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the challenges ahead. Then, almost as if compelled by an unseen force, they all nodded in unison. "We accept," they declared, their voices resolute. Richard, ever the decisive one, took charge. Tomorrow morning, we start with the first challenge. After the siblings agreed to face the daunting tests laid out by their mother, Susan, and Richard quietly slipped away to a secluded corner of the mansion, far from Mr. Evans' watchful eye and out of earshot from Laura. "We can't let Laura get the inheritance," Richard hissed, his voice low but urgent. "You know as well as I do that she'll give it all away to some charity without a second thought." Susan's eyes narrowed, a steely resolve hardening her features. "I agree. That idealistic fool has no idea how to handle a fortune like this. Mother's wealth would be far better managed in our hands." Richard nodded, his thoughts racing. "Exactly. We need to find a way to turn these challenges to our advantage, make sure the outcome is what we want." Susan glanced around, ensuring no one could overhear them. "What are you proposing? How can we rig this in our favor?" Richard leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We need to think smart and act fast. Maybe there's a way to sabotage the boxes or manipulate the situation so that only one of us, preferably me, finds the key." Susan smirked, her mind already working on how to make their plan a reality. "Let's see what Mr. Evans reveals next. We'll use whatever information we get to ensure that neither Laura nor anyone else stands in our way." With that, the siblings shared a look of silent agreement, both knowing they were willing to cross any line necessary to claim their mother's fortune, even if it meant betraying the very family they were supposed to protect. Richard's lips curled into a sly, mocking grin. "We'll ensure she picks the wrong box. Laura relies too much on her instincts, and we can use that against her." Susan's expression darkened with unease. "This feels dangerous, Richard. What if something goes wrong? We're talking about our sister." Richard's gaze hardened. "If we don't take this chance, Laura could end up leaving us with nothing. We can't afford to hesitate now. We need to act before she beats us to it." As the siblings whispered their plans, Laura observed them from afar, her unease deepening. She had always known Richard and Susan were driven by ambition, but she never suspected they would stoop so low as to conspire against her. The realization struck her like a blow, filling her with a cold sense of betrayal. Mr. Evans approached her, his presence interrupting her troubled thoughts. "Laura, are you all right? You seem lost in thought." Laura forced a smile, masking the turmoil within. "I'm fine, Mr. Evans. Just trying to make sense of all this." The lawyer studied her face, his eyes searching for signs of distress. "Remember, Laura, these challenges are an opportunity to demonstrate your true character. Don't let external pressures sway you from what you know is right." Laura nodded, comforted by his words. "But what about my siblings? They won't stop until they've won." Mr. Evans' expression grew serious. "I'll be watching them closely, and I'll do everything in my power to ensure the challenges are conducted fairly." As Mr. Evans walked away, Laura felt a surge of determination. She knew she would have to rely on her strength and wits to navigate the challenges ahead. Meanwhile, Richard and Susan continued plotting, oblivious to Laura's growing awareness of their schemes. The inheritance was no longer just about passing their mother's trials. It had become a battleground of deception and sibling rivalry, where betrayal lurked behind every promise of loyalty. The next morning, the siblings reconvened at the mansion, their nerves taut as they prepared to face the first challenge. The room they entered was shrouded in darkness, with only 3 identical boxes illuminated by a faint, eerie light. Mr. Evans stood before them, his expression as serious as ever. "Are you ready?" the lawyer asked, his gaze sweeping over each of them. Richard and Susan exchanged a knowing glance, brimming with confidence in their underhanded plan. Laura, sensing the tension but keeping her thoughts to herself, nodded quietly. "Very well," Mr. Evans said, his voice carrying a weight of finality. "Follow me." He led them down a long, dimly lit corridor to a sturdy wooden door. When he opened it, the siblings saw a small, pitch-black room, except for the 3 boxes positioned in the center, casting long shadows. "Remember," the lawyer warned, "one of these boxes holds the key to the next challenge. The other 2, well, you know what awaits inside." A chill ran down their spines as Mr. Evans stepped back, closing and locking the door behind him, leaving the siblings alone with their fates. Without hesitation, Richard and Susan sprang into action. "Let me and Susan go first," Richard offered with feigned kindness. "We're older, so it's our duty to lead." Before Laura could voice any objection, Susan had already approached one of the boxes, her movements quick and deliberate. She discreetly slipped a bribe to the attendant managing the room, who subtly signaled toward the box containing the key. Susan, trying to hide her anxiety, reached for the box and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, gleaming under the dim light, was a small silver key. "I found the key," Susan exclaimed triumphantly, her voice echoing in the dark room. Richard smirked, satisfied that their plan had succeeded, while Laura looked on, her suspicions deepening. As Susan held the key aloft, the air in the room grew tense, filled with the unspoken understanding that the real battle was only beginning. The inheritance was not just about facing the challenges, it was about surviving the treachery within their own family. Richard turned to Laura with a forced smile, attempting to mask his underlying intentions. "Why don't you go next, little sister?" he suggested, nodding toward one of the remaining boxes. Laura, unaware of the plot against her, stepped forward and reached out to open the box. But before she could touch it, the door burst open with a loud bang, startling everyone in the room. James, her late mother's closest friend, stormed in, followed closely by Mr. Evans. "Stop everything!" James shouted, his voice filled with urgency. In his hand, he held a small video device, which he quickly activated. The room filled with the unmistakable voices of Richard and Susan, caught on camera as they conspired to rig the challenge. Laura's eyes widened in shock as she realized the depth of her siblings' betrayal. Richard and Susan stood frozen, their faces drained of color, unable to comprehend how their scheme had been exposed. James, his expression filled with disappointment, stepped forward. "Your mother anticipated that the 2 of you might resort to dishonesty," he said, shaking his head sadly. "She instructed me to install hidden cameras and monitor the entire process. The true purpose of these challenges was to assess your honesty and morality, not just your ability to complete tasks." A heavy silence descended on the room as Richard and Susan were forced to confront the enormity of their actions. Shame burned on their faces, the weight of their deceit crushing any defiance they might have had left. Mr. Evans moved closer, his eyes cold with disdain. "It appears that the inheritance will not be yours after all," he declared, his voice sharp and unforgiving. Laura's gaze shifted between her siblings, tears welling up in her eyes. The pain of their betrayal cut deep, but it was the overwhelming sense of disappointment that left her heartbroken. Her mother had been right to question their integrity. James approached Laura, his voice softening with compassion. "I'm sorry you had to experience this, Laura. Your mother trusted that you would do the right thing, no matter the circumstances." Laura nodded, struggling to process the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. "Thank you, James. At least now I know where I stand and what my mother truly wanted." Mr. Evans cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. "Laura," he said, his tone more gentle now, "you are the only one who has shown the integrity your mother valued so highly. As per her wishes, the entire fortune will be yours." Laura blinked, struggling to grasp the reality of what she was hearing. "But what about Richard and Susan?" she asked, her voice tinged with sadness. Mr. Evans shook his head firmly. "According to the explicit clauses in Miss Charlotte's will, they will receive nothing. Their greed and dishonesty have disqualified them from any inheritance." Richard and Susan stood in stunned silence, the consequences of their actions crashing down on them like a tidal wave. There was nothing left to say, no arguments to make. They had gambled everything on their scheme and lost it all. As the reality of the situation sank in, Laura felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. She would inherit her mother's fortune, but the cost of that inheritance, the betrayal of her siblings, was far too high to celebrate. The bonds of family, once taken for granted, were now irreparably damaged. Mr. Evans, still wearing the mask of disappointment, turned to Richard and Susan one final time. "Your mother entrusted you with the opportunity to prove yourselves worthy, and you squandered it through deceit. You should both be ashamed." With those words, the lawyer walked away, leaving the room heavy with the weight of what had transpired. Laura knew that her life would never be the same, but at least she had the comfort of knowing she had remained true to her principles, even in the face of betrayal. Richard, desperate to salvage the situation, tried to justify their actions, but his voice was weak and unconvincing. "We just wanted to make sure the inheritance went to the right person." Enough, Susan interrupted, her voice trembling as she turned to James, her eyes pleading. "There must be some mistake. We never meant to betray Laura. It wasn't intentional." James sighed heavily, his expression a mixture of pity and disappointment. "The evidence speaks for itself, Susan. You and Richard were caught red-handed. Your mother left no ambiguity in her instructions. The purpose of these challenges was crystal clear." Mr. Evans, having consulted the documents in his case, spoke with an unyielding tone. "According to Miss Charlotte's will, any attempt to manipulate or cheat during these challenges results in immediate disqualification from the inheritance. You forfeited any claim you had." Richard's fists clenched in frustration, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "This is unfair. Laura doesn't deserve it more than we do." James stepped forward, his expression stern. "Laura upheld the values your mother held dear: honesty, integrity, and respect for her wishes. She faced the challenges without resorting to deceit." As the confrontation unfolded in the dimly lit room, Laura remained in the background, her emotions a whirlwind of sadness and relief. She struggled to comprehend the extent of her siblings' greed, but amidst it all, she felt a quiet gratitude for being recognized for her integrity. Finally, Mr. Evans turned to Laura with a gentle smile. "Laura, by your mother's wishes, you are the sole beneficiary of the inheritance." Laura nodded, still processing the gravity of the situation. She never sought the fortune, but as the realization sank in, she felt the weight of responsibility. Meanwhile, Richard's face contorted with anger, and Susan's tears began to flow freely. "This isn't right," Richard protested, his voice tinged with desperation. Laura didn't even want the inheritance. Susan joined in, her voice cracking with emotion. "Please, give us another chance. We'll do anything to make it right." Laura looked at her siblings, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. Part of her was tempted to hold them accountable for their betrayal, but her innate sense of kindness and family loyalty held her back. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "I accept the inheritance," she said calmly, raising her hand to silence Richard and Susan's protests, "but on one condition." Mr. Evans and James exchanged surprised glances. "And what condition would that be?" Mr. Evans asked, his curiosity piqued. Laura smiled faintly. "My condition is that my siblings are given a chance to redeem themselves, to prove they can act with the honesty and integrity our mother valued." Richard and Susan stared at her in stunned silence, hardly believing what they were hearing. James crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. "And how do you propose we ensure that?" Laura met his gaze, her voice steady and resolute. They will have 1 year during which their actions will be closely monitored by you, James, and Mr. Evans. If, at the end of that period, they demonstrate genuine change in their behavior and attitudes, then we can reassess the inheritance." Mr. Evans considered Laura's proposal carefully, while James nodded in agreement. "That's a fair and generous offer," Laura James said. "Your mother would be proud of your compassion." Richard and Susan, still reeling from the unexpected turn of events, looked at each other with a mixture of shame and hope. This was their last chance to make amends and prove they could rise above their past mistakes. With a renewed sense of purpose, Laura extended her hand to them. "Let's use this opportunity to rebuild our family and honor Mother's memory together." Tears welled up in Susan's eyes as she took Laura's hand, and Richard, his pride bruised but his resolve strengthened, followed suit. For the first time in a long while, the three siblings stood united not by greed, but by a shared commitment to restore what had been broken. And so, with the lawyer's approval, the siblings embarked on a year-long journey of redemption, knowing that the true inheritance their mother left behind was not in wealth, but in the values she instilled in them. What Richard blurted out, his voice laced with frustration. "But a year is too long." Mr. Evans raised his hand to silence him, his expression stern. "This is a generous offer from Laura," the lawyer said, his tone brooking no argument. "If you truly want to make amends, you must accept this opportunity with humility." Susan wiped the lingering tears from her eyes, her face now resolute. "We accept," she said firmly, meeting Laura's gaze with a mixture of gratitude and determination. "We'll prove that we deserve another chance." Richard, though reluctant, realized he had no other option. "Fine," he muttered, still struggling with the reality of the situation. Laura smiled softly, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Then it settled. Mr. Evans nodded approvingly, satisfied with the outcome. "James and I will ensure that this probation period is both fair and rigorous," he stated. James placed a hand on Laura's shoulder, his expression filled with admiration. "You've shown true greatness today, Laura." As the siblings walked away, each of them lost in their thoughts, Laura knew that the next year would be pivotal. Despite everything, she held on to the hope that Richard and Susan could find their way to redemption. Deep down, she still wanted to believe in the possibility of restoring the family they had once dreamed of being. In the days that followed, Laura immersed herself in managing the vast businesses and fortunes left behind by her late mother. As she adapted to her new responsibilities, the decision to give her siblings a chance for redemption remained ever present in her mind. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to see it through. One afternoon, while Laura was reviewing documents in her office, there was a hesitant knock on the door. "Come in," she called, looking up from her work. The door creaked open, and Richard entered, his eyes downcast, the weight of remorse evident in his posture. Laura greeted him, her voice a careful balance of compassion and caution. She noted the vulnerability in his green eyes, a stark contrast to the usual firmness she was accustomed to. She understood that this moment was crucial, not just for Richard, but for the future of their family. I wanted to apologize again for my actions during the challenges," Richard began, his voice heavy with regret. "I was blinded by greed and lost sight of what truly matters." Laura paused, choosing her words with care. "I appreciate your apology, Richard. What happened hurt all of us, but I do believe people can change if they're genuinely willing to." Richard nodded, a mix of relief and anxiety flickering across his face. "I know I have a lot to prove, and I understand if my words don't carry much weight right now, but I am determined to make things right. I want to redeem myself, Laura. I want to show that I can be trusted and that I can positively honor our mother's legacy." Laura studied her brother for a moment, sensing the sincerity behind his words. Redemption isn't easy, Richard, but it's not impossible. Actions speak louder than words, and I hope you're ready to demonstrate the change you've spoken of. Richard met her gaze, a flicker of hope in his eyes. I am Laura. I won't let you down. As he left the office, Laura felt a sense of cautious optimism. The road ahead would be challenging, but if Richard and Susan could truly change, perhaps there was hope for their family after all. For Laura, the inheritance had become less about wealth and more about restoring the bonds that had been broken, and she was willing to see where this path of redemption might lead them all. The sincerity in Richard's words touched Laura deeply. For years, she had seen her brother as a relentless competitor, someone willing to abandon principles in pursuit of personal gain. But in this rare moment of vulnerability, she glimpsed a side of him that he seldom revealed. I believe in second chances, Richard Laura said with a calm yet resolute tone. But I won't make it easy. If you truly want to be part of this legacy, you'll need to prove your sincerity through actions, not just words. Our business and charity projects demand integrity, commitment, and a genuine desire to make a difference. Richard nodded, his expression firm with determination. I understand. I don't expect this to be easy, but I'm ready to work hard and earn back everyone's trust. Laura offered a light, encouraging smile. Start small. Prove yourself every day, and if you ever need guidance or support, I'll be here. She studied Richard for a few more seconds, her gaze penetrating as she weighed his sincerity. Since inheriting her mother's business and fortune, Laura had faced numerous challenges, and Richard's presence at this pivotal moment could mark a turning point for both him and the family. I accept your apology, Richard, she said, her voice firm. But remember, actions speak louder than words. You'll need to prove that you've truly changed. Richard nodded vigorously, his face radiating genuine determination. I know, and that's why I'm here. I'd like to join you and work on one of your projects. Laura raised an eyebrow in surprise. Are you serious? You've always dismissed my charity work. Richard hesitated, lowering his eyes before meeting her gaze again, his voice tinged with regret. Yes, and I was wrong. Your work is noble and makes a real difference in people's lives. I want to help, Laura, please let me. Laura scrutinized her brother for a moment longer, evaluating his words and the emotions behind them. She saw a genuine shift in Richard, something she had never seen before. A small smile tugged at her lips, a mix of hope and caution. All right, Richard, she said finally, her tone decisive. I'll give you a chance, but be warned at the first sign of dishonesty, it will be your last. Richard nodded seriously, his gratitude evident. I understand. I promise I won't let you down. As he left Laura's office, Richard felt a blend of relief and determination. He knew the road ahead would be tough, but he was willing to face the challenge of regaining his sister's trust and proving his transformation was real. Laura, watching him go, reflected on the challenges and possibilities that lay ahead. She had taken on not just the mantle of the family business, but also the responsibility of guiding her siblings onto a path of integrity and righteousness. It was an enormous task, but she was committed to preserving her mother's legacy, no matter what it took. In the weeks that followed, Richard threw himself into one of Laura's social projects, the construction of a school for underprivileged children. Laura observed him closely, noting his renewed determination and willingness to contribute meaningfully. She saw a brother she had long hoped for, one who understood the importance of their mother's values. One day, as Laura walked through the construction site, she spotted Susan approaching her, her expression hesitant. Laura, can I talk to you? Susan asked softly. Laura stopped and turned to face her sister, sensing the tension in her voice. Of course, Susan. What's on your mind? Susan glanced around, her eyes betraying a mix of anxiety and vulnerability. I've been thinking a lot since everything happened. I know I made terrible mistakes, and I see how hard Richard is working to make amends. I want to do the same, Laura, but I don't know where to start." Laura's heart softened as she listened. She could hear the sincerity in Susan's voice, the same sincerity that had moved her when Richard first apologized. "It's never too late to change," Laura said gently. "Like Richard, you can start by taking small steps. Focus on one of our projects, something that speaks to you, and commit yourself fully. The rest will follow." Susan nodded, her eyes filling with hope. "Thank you, Laura. I want to prove that I can change too." Laura smiled warmly. "Then let's begin, Susan. Together we can rebuild what was broken and honor the legacy that Mother left us." As they stood together on the construction site, surrounded by the sounds of progress, Laura felt a renewed sense of hope. Her siblings were beginning to understand that the true inheritance was not the fortune, but the values their mother had instilled in them. And with that understanding, perhaps their family could finally find its way back to the unity they once knew. Laura nodded, her smile warm and encouraging. "Of course, Susan. What's on your mind?" Susan hesitated, twisting her hands nervously before speaking. I wanted to apologize as well and accept your offer of redemption. Seeing Richard work so hard has inspired me. I want to do the right thing this time." Laura's smile widened, her heart swelling with hope. "I'm glad to hear that, Susan. There will always be a place for you here if you truly want to redeem yourself." Tears welled up in Susan's eyes as she embraced Laura tightly. "Thank you for this chance. I won't let you down again." Laura returned the hug, looking at Susan with tenderness. "We're rebuilding our family, Susan. Together we can make a difference." With Richard and Susan striving for redemption, Laura continued to manage the family business with wisdom and compassion. Under her leadership, the school project quickly took shape, driven by the hard work and renewed passion of everyone involved. Day by day, the siblings grew into a united team, dedicated to fulfilling their mother's vision. But the path to redemption was not without its struggles. Richard battled his old habits of manipulation and greed, frequently tempted to revert to his selfish impulses. Meanwhile, Susan faced the challenge of rebuilding her self-confidence, often doubting whether her efforts could truly atone for her past mistakes. Laura, too, faced her dilemmas, balancing her new responsibilities with the need to guide her siblings along the way. She leaned on the lessons of integrity and compassion that their mother had taught them, striving to be the example her siblings needed. In the months that followed, Richard and Susan threw themselves into their work with newfound determination, partnering with Laura on various social projects. Gradually, the bitterness and greed that once defined them began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of purpose and fulfillment. The smiles of the children they were helping became powerful reminders of what truly mattered in life. Laura watched with pride as her siblings transformed before her eyes. The challenges they faced and the rediscovery of the values of generosity and honest work led Richard and Susan to find a new sense of self. Conversations that once centered around financial strategies were replaced by discussions about how to improve children's education, and the competitiveness between them evolved into genuine collaboration. On a sunny afternoon, as Laura strolled through the school's gardens, she spotted Richard and Susan interacting with the children. They were laughing together, helping paint murals on the walls, and handing out school supplies. The sight warmed Laura's heart, reminding her of how far they had come since that fateful day when they first learned of their mother's will. As dusk settled, and the day's volunteer work came to an end, the three siblings gathered in the school's administration room. Sitting around a table, they exchanged looks full of gratitude and mutual understanding. "I can't believe how much has changed," Susan said with a sincere smile. "Laura, thank you for believing in us and giving us this opportunity." Richard nodded in agreement, his usually stern expression softened by the lightness of newfound contentment. "You showed us the way, Laura. I never imagined I could feel so fulfilled." Laura's eyes shone with pride and emotion. "You both did the hard work. I only offered the chance. It's incredible to see how you've embraced it." A moment of silence fell over them as they reflected on how far they had come. The legacy that once felt like a burden now stood as a testament to their growth, shining as a beacon of hope and renewal. "I know we can't change the past," Richard said, breaking the silence. "But we can shape our future." He looked at his sisters with determination. "Let's keep making a difference here. I promise we'll never lose sight of what matters." Susan and Laura nodded in agreement, their hearts full of hope. They knew that while the journey had been difficult, it had brought them closer as a family and had allowed them to honor their mother's legacy in the most meaningful way possible. Together, they were ready to continue building a future based on the values that truly mattered: love, integrity, and the desire to make a positive impact on the world. Susan's eyes gleamed with unwavering resolve as she nodded, her voice steady but filled with passion. "We'll never deviate from the path of integrity. This school is just the first step on our journey." Laura's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and sorrow, her eyes misting as she struggled to hold back tears. "Mother would be so incredibly proud of you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You carry her spirit in everything you do. You are her living legacy." Bound together by the profound power of redemption and a newfound devotion to a higher purpose, the three siblings pressed on with renewed vigor. Over a year, Richard and Susan had shown remarkable transformation, earning not just their share of the inheritance, but also the trust and respect that had once been shattered. Together, they built something far greater than they had ever imagined. Their school for underprivileged children became a beacon of hope, but more than that, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, a foundation rooted not in material wealth, but in the enduring values of generosity, compassion, and honesty. This was not just a new family legacy, it was a testament to their shared strength, their collective love, and the indomitable spirit of a family truly reborn. As we come to the end of this heartfelt story, we hope you've been inspired by the transformative power of integrity, compassion, and perseverance. What have you learned from this journey? We invite you to reflect and share in the comments below one lesson that has resonated with you and how you plan to apply it in your own life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more uplifting and thought-provoking content. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us.